ANZ set to bid $4.5 billion for MYOB, setting up a battle in the small business sector. New figures show that CEOs are earning more than ever, and there is a crisis at Bunnings. The cost of a sausage sizzle is about to rise. It's Thursday, the 14th of July, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Really is a sad day. The Bunnings sausage singer. I know you're a big fan because you're a regular visitor to Bunnings. Do you often get the sandwich?
Yeah, often, whenever it's there. And the good thing is it's always supporting a good cause. But the thing about it is you'll always know how much it's going to cost because it hasn't changed for the last 15 years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I've been involved in community groups and like kids' sporting teams. The best way to raise money was always the Bunnings sausage sizzle. You could have car washes and raffles and all that. Nothing beat the Bunnings sausage sizzle.
Yeah, the problem is that when I have done one of them before and I find that I eat a lot of the stock because sausage sizzles, that would be my final meal if I could choose.
Yeah.
I cannot get enough of the humble sausage sizzle. And so this story really kind of hits home for me, Sean.
I remember years ago, Nick Greiner was the Premier of New South Wales, and they asked his then wife, Catherine Greiner, what Nick thought about, often when he went out. And she said, it's amazing how many times he comes back from some official function and says, there was a great sausage singer there today. That's how he rated them. And I'm sorry, Nick, if you're listening, I apologise. I may sort of get that slightly out of context, but that was certainly the gist of it. I totally agree. Sausage singer fan.
And Sean, just one very quick mention, of course, that today is Thursday, as we know, which means there is a new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed out today, which is our lighter look at the world of business. Very light and vaguely business.
Always a bit reticent to mention Safe Word. It's flippant. I say light, maybe flippant is a better way of putting it.
Flippant probably is actually the right way to do it. So I think, Sean, it's also just a good way to remind people that if you used to listen to Safe Word on a Sunday because it was part of the Fear and Greed playlist and it kind of automatically downloaded on a Sunday, it doesn't do that anymore. You need to go and find it. It is out on its own. Just search for Safe Word by Fear and Greed on your podcast platform, wherever you listen, and you'll be able to find it and make sure you hit subscribe or follow. Anyway, we have to get on with it because we've got a lot coming up today, and you've got an interview after the show this morning, Sean, with Rachel Slade from NAB about how much retail banking has changed.
That's right. Thanks to COVID and higher interest rates, people are behaving differently. Really interesting chat with Rachel.
Yeah. Now, the main story this morning, though, Sean, is all about ANZ, and that bank is set to buy accounting software group MYOB from private equity group KKR after a very busy 2021. The pace of mergers and acquisitions are certainly slowed, but this is a big one, and it kind of signals exactly where ANZ thinks that its future lies.
That's right. The bid is close. It could possibly lob today and has been in the offing for about 4 months. Estimates have the price at $4.5 billion. A deal would improve ANZ's offering to small and medium-sized business clients, a very lucrative market that's traditionally belonged to National Australia Bank. Owning MYOB would allow customers to better integrate their banking and accounting systems. And, of course, any deal, they would need to pass regulatory scrutiny.
So then what's it mean for ANZ?
Well, MYOB has about 1 million customers in Australia and New Zealand. It provides business management, financial and accounting solutions for SMEs, enterprise and accounting practice customers. That area is a mouthful first, but it's becoming much more crowded in terms of providers. Block, for example, the buy now, pay later financial payments player, Block. Apple, they're increasingly offering business customers accounting and consulting services, as are all the big banks. But owning one of the major players like MYOB puts ANZ in position to work with SMEs on everything from customer relationship management, software and e-commerce to payroll and invoicing. And if ANZ can become central to a business customer, it won't lose that customer. Importantly for the bank, which is the fourth of the big four, it's a growth strategy. ANZ's really struggled to compete with the other three banks, particularly Commonwealth Bank and National Australia Bank in home lending. It's a similar story in personal lending. Taking a bet on SMEs gives ANZ a growth trajectory at a time when interest rates are rising and competitors are encroaching on traditional banking products.
Sean, so what about in terms of the deal itself? Is it a good deal for KKR, the seller? And then on the flip side, what about for ANZ?
Well, I think it's a good deal for KKR. MYOB was listed on the ASX until May 2019 when the private equity group bought it for about $2.4 billion. Effectively, it privatised it back then. Seems like KKR will almost double its money in a little over 3 years. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. ANZ share price fell more than 1% yesterday. That was the worst of the big banks, but that could reflect expectations of a capital raising. All in all, ANZ share price is down nearly 20% over the past couple of months. Perhaps this will give it the fillip it needs.
All right, bit of activity happening there. How about local markets? What happened yesterday?
S&P ASX 200 rallied late in the day to finish up 0.2% to 6,622 points. It started the day down, but sort of trended higher all day. It only got into positive territory in the final hour or so. The technology, industrials and consumer discretionary sectors all did well, while energy and utilities companies fell back a bit. BHP and Rio fell around 1.4%, while Woodside Energy was off nearly 3%. Macquarie Group was the best of the large caps. It jumped nearly 4%. And something else I want to mention, Michael, Vanguard put out an interesting report on exchange-traded funds, or ETFs. Assets under management in the industry fell by almost 10% in the June quarter, from $132 billion to $119 billion. That's a huge fall, but it was pretty much thanks to market moves. Net inflows remained positive, though not quite as strong as previous quarters. Vanguard said some thematic and exotic ETFs had fared significantly worse. Where there was a big jump was fixed income ETFs, reflecting rising interest rates. In fact, inflows were up 148% on fixed income ETFs.
Oh, wow. Okay. What about international markets?
Trading in global equity markets have just been a bit calmer recently. Now, fears of a recession in the US and Europe are dominating sentiment. Brent crude prices fell back under $100 a barrel on the back of those recession fears. Oil prices are still high, but the price at the pump is dropping as more refinery capacity comes on board, and of course, as oil prices fall back. Bitcoin fell back below $20,000 a unit yesterday, having had a better run last week. It jumps around according to risk appetite, and it's now trading around $19,000 a unit. The second largest crypto, Ether, also fell back yesterday. It was down about 9%. And the Aussie dollar is a bit higher, trading around 67.5 US cents.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was in Fiji yesterday for the Pacific Islands Forum, and he pledged that Australian aid would be delivered with no strings attached and that Canberra would respect nation sovereignty.
There are a few fences to mend in the region, or perhaps bridges to build. Mr. Albanese also said he wanted better relations with Solomon Islands, which of course signed a security pact with China in April during the election campaign. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Albanese met the leader of the Solomon Islands, and apparently the meeting went well. The Prime Minister agreed with comments from US Vice President Kamala Harris, who made a virtual appearance at the summit, that Australia and the US had neglected the Pacific and allowed China to gain influence. Mr. Albanese held several meetings yesterday, and he said in his discussions climate change was the number one issue that emerged.
Sean, I was pretty confronted by this next story. I find this actually pretty alarming. Federal Health Minister Mark Butler yesterday said that millions of new COVID-19 infections are expected around Australia in the last 6 weeks of winter. That is huge.
That's far, far more than what we're getting at the moment. Now, Mr. Butler urged the community to wear masks and work from home where possible, not just in Victoria, where that advice came out a couple of days ago. He was talking across the nation. Mr. Butler said there was little appetite for strict mandates, and a common sense interpretation of advice from chief health officers was sufficient to limit transmission of the BA4 and BA5 variants. Based on official data, there are about 250 to 300,000 people currently infected, though the real number is thought to be at least twice that. He is talking about millions. That's 4 times that level.
It's pretty frightening, really. And just staying on the same theme, really, Qantas is going to remove its requirement that international travellers be vaccinated against COVID-19 from next Monday.
That's right. It follows the federal government's decision that new arrivals into the country don't need to be inoculated.
All right, moving on. And CEO pay, Sean, is always controversial. And a new report shows that 15 CEOs took home more than $10 million in the 2021 financial year.
Yes, and the really big number is what Afterpay's founders and co-CEOs pocketed, $264 million in realised earnings between them. Now, Anthony Eisner and Nick Molnar, of course, sold the business, hence the payout. According to the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors, CSL boss Paul Perreault took home nearly $59 million as the Blood Plasma Group's share price defied the pandemic. Next was Goodman Group's Greg Goodman, who went home with $37 million, and then Macquarie's Shamara Wickramanayaka, who made almost $15 million. CEO pay, Michael, is going to be a very contentious issue at the next round of annual general meetings when you see CEOs earning so much money, even though this was for last financial year, and shareholders are watching share prices go backwards. It isn't a good recipe.
Yeah, it could make for some fiery questions, I reckon.
I'd say so.
Now, there are growing concerns about an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Australia, which could threaten the local cattle industry.
Yes, that's right. The livestock disease affects pigs, cattle, sheep and goats and was detected in Indonesia in May. It spread to Bali last week, and of course there are plenty of Aussies visiting Bali at the moment over the school holidays. Federal Agriculture Minister Murray Watt is visiting Indonesia this week to gather more information about how it's containing the contagious disease. Nationals leader David Littleproud said Watt's priority should be to introduce comprehensive screening at Australian airports. New South Wales Deputy Premier Paul Toole, obviously a National, warned of the dire threat the disease posed to the cattle industry and the livelihoods of thousands of farmers across the state. Foot and mouth disease is causing some real concerns in the rural sector at the moment.
Yeah, sure is. The boss of BlueScope Steel's Climate Change and Sustainability Division says there needs to be a reality check about green steel.
Yes, there's lots of enthusiasm about green steel, but I thought it was quite interesting. So the steel industry, along with cement makers and chemical industries, is among the biggest emitters of carbon. Steel making accounts for about 7% of global carbon emissions. Green steel, where hydrogen rather than coal powers the steel making, is supposed to provide a way forward. Plenty of talk about it, plenty of excitement. But BlueScope's Greta Stevens says there's a long way to go before it can be commercially viable. Now, her company, BlueScope, has set 2050 goals, but there's plenty of technology that still needs to be developed or invented between now and then to actually hit that goal. In fact, currently, she said, there's no green steel being produced anywhere in the world.
Now, Sean, retailer Kathmandu has delivered a record performance, and I know that's one of your favourite shops because you love their puffer jackets and their hiking poles and everything for when you do your walks around your suburbs. But the owner of Kathmandu, KMD Brands, says that lower foot traffic and staff absences by illness are hurting some stores.
In fact, some stores are closing or have had to close. KMD Brands, which also owns Oboz and Ripcool, upped its total sales figure for the full year to the end of July yesterday, and that's thanks to a great performance primarily by Kathmandu, but it lowered its earnings forecast, and that sent its share price down 1%.
And Sean, we had a big chat about this one at the top of the show just because it is such bad news. There is a crisis going on at Bunnings.
Yes, well, outside the front door of Bunnings, the price of a sausage sandwich is rising by $1 to $3.50. Still excellent value, I'd say, though, Michael.
Yeah. Look, you know what? There's one downside to it that I just don't know whether anyone's really considered, is that there's going to be a lot more handling of change and coins and things, which in the current climate is not a good idea. Because if you buy 2 sausage sandwiches, because you never just buy one, you can hand over a $5 note and that's it. You don't need any change. Whereas now you're always going to have coins and change and all of that kind of thing. So I just don't know whether it's been thought through.
Yeah, look, it's the first increase in 15 years. All groups who hold the sausage sizzle must charge the same amount for a sanger. Bunnings Chief Executive Michael Schneider on Melbourne radio yesterday said that community groups over the last couple of years have complained about the difficulty of raising funds when you've got to pay higher prices for bread, snag, onions, tomato sauce, I presume. Apologies for being the bearer of bad news on this one, Michael, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, it makes me sound like a bit of a Grinch now that I was complaining about it when you do remember that it is for community groups. But
That's right.
Anyway, we'll move on quite quickly, shall we? To overseas news now, Sean. And New Zealand Central Bank has lifted interest rates by 0.5 percentage point for the third month in a row, taking the cash rate there to 2.5%.
The Reserve Bank of New Zealand has been lifting interest rates more aggressively than many others, and the board said it would continue to lift at pace until it was sure inflation had been contained. Of course, 2.5% is close to twice what the Australian cash rate is. Also yesterday, Michael, the Korean Central Bank lifted interest rates as it battles with inflation that's running at a 23-year high.
Now, Sean, we've talked recently about the crisis in Sri Lanka, and there's a major update now with the former president fleeing the country yesterday and huge protests occurring around the nation.
Yes, the island nation has gone into economic freefall and is just about bankrupt, struggling to pay for food and fuel imports. Inflation is running at 70%, and schools and offices have shut down. Not surprisingly, this has led to intense social unrest. The International Monetary Fund is discussing bailout packages with the country. Yesterday, the president left the country on a military aircraft bound for the Maldives. Thousands of people had stormed and occupied the presidential palace last weekend. Let's hope things improve there.
And finally, Sean, I've got no idea what to make of this story. North Korea has become very upset by a fleet of balloons from South Korea floating into its airspace and has started blaming them for the current COVID outbreak.
It's a wacky world, Michael.
It sure is.
The totalitarian regime has been totally unnerved by balloons, apparently. The balloons were sent in from neighbouring South Korea carrying anti-regime leaflets, electronic devices, pain relief tablets, and even coronavirus aids such as masks. According to the Financial Times, Pyongyang has denounced the resumption of balloon flights, with state media attributing a large-scale COVID outbreak to, quote, alien things coming by wind, end quote. North Korean media said the sources of the most recent outbreak of COVID-19 were an 18-year-old and a 5-year-old coming into contact with the balloons.
Of course. That makes sense. Okay, Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview, and your guest today is Rachel Slade from NAB.
Yes, as we mentioned earlier in the show, we talk all about retail banking. So that's mortgages, we talk about ATM usage, credit cards, all sorts of things. Really interesting chat with Rachel, who, is a very, very senior executive at National Australia Bank. And what I like about talking to her is that she speaks very plain English, very easy to converse with and understand, and she certainly knows her job.
Yeah, it was a really good chat. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 14th of July, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget that new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed is out today, and you can find that one wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.